business. I'm a big stepper.
Yeah, ho, ho. What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Off the Bench podcast. I am Daniel Ball, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, my partner in crime, my brother from another mother, Jim Cross. And Jim, we are talking United Grid League tonight. First time ever. We're going to be talking to Matt Hornaday, owner, general manager, coach, you name it. He is the jack of all trades for the Palm Beach Breakers in the United Grid League. But before we talk to Matt, we got to pay the bills around this place. Chinook Seedery, whether you're on the field or in the boardroom signing deals, Chinook will help you get the job done. Old Dominic Distillery, experience 150 years of tradition in the heart of downtown Memphis. From bourbon to vodka, whiskey to gin, Old Dominic's got you covered. Stop in today for a tour or to pick up your favorite bottle. And as always, tell them DB, tell them Jim from the In Off the Bench podcast sent you. Jim, I feel good. The bills have been paid. We can get this thing going. So help me welcome on to the show with the biggest interview in podcasting this week. Palm Beach Breakers owner, general manager, coach, jack of all trades, Matt Hornaday. Matt, my man, how are we doing tonight?
Doing good. Thanks for the intro. But before we jump into that, Old Dominic's, I'm a huge bourbon guy, so I'm going to have to check that out.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, man, they are sending some good stuff to me. I just had a 6-year-old cask bourbon whiskey, and it was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. If we get a chance to meet up, I'll definitely bring you some samples because, I mean, it's they make it for everything. If you like that sweetness or you like that sharp punch, I mean, they got you covered, man. They got everything. And if you're not a bourbon or a whiskey person, they got vodka, they got gin. Jim's been to the distillery. He's been to the tasting room. He's done it all. And it's top notch. It's by far one of the best distilleries around. So
nice.
With that, owner, general manager, and coach, bro, that's a lot. And Jim, I don't know, man. I feel like this is new sacred territory that you know about working out, but this is a little bit different of a beast, man. Are you ready for this, Jim?
I mean, not cardiovascularly, I'm not, but I mean, I'm down. No, I kid, man. Yeah, excited to get your story, Matt, man. This is an opportunity to spotlight, you and who you are and obviously the sport that you're a part of. But before we can do any of that, we got to go back to the beginning. Where are you actually from?
Man, so that's a loaded question. I was born in Michigan, moved around a ton as a kid through the Midwest, moved over to the East Coast for a little bit, Delaware, Maryland over there, went back to Michigan for college, some more tours around the Midwest, and then moved to Florida about 12 years ago. So Florida's home officially now for me.
See, I told you, Jim. Everybody that lives in Florida is not from Florida.
Just about. I mean, it's came that way with everybody we've talked to now at this point. Well, you're constantly on the move. What are the family dynamics like as you're moving? You got a big family, small family, brothers, sisters. What's up?
So I'm the youngest of 5. So when we did a lot of the moving early on, that was my mom kind of transitioning. She went back to college. Got her PhD when we lived in Iowa, got her first job out of college. And that's when we moved to Delaware. Then the next job after that was in Maryland. And then I went to college, my first job out of college, and then just transitioning down. So youngest of 5, I've got 3 brothers, 1 sister. 2 of my siblings actually moved to Florida as well. So I recruited pretty well. I got my mom to move to Florida too. On my side, for my family, I've got my wife, who we've been married for 12 years now, 13 years actually. And I've got 2 kids. I've got a 7 and a 5-year-old. And we recruited on my wife's side of the family too. So we've got her parents down here, her grandmother down here. On the west side of the state, we've got more family over there. So we did pretty well in terms of the recruiting game for sure.
Yeah, nice big family. Congratulations on success with your marriage and your kids. Going back to the youngest of 5 siblings, one thing that we've learned on this show is the younger siblings tend to thrive. It's a iron sharpens iron mentality within the house. You learn a lot from your older siblings. Was that the case for you being the youngest of 5? Did it help make and mold you into a better person growing up?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, my siblings, one, like all the stuff that they went through, all the bad stuff, you learn like, okay, maybe don't do that. But in addition to that, they're actually guiding you and coaching you and mentoring you about what you do need to do. Honestly, like my sports journey came from my second oldest brother getting me into playing football. And before that, like back then, I wanted to be a soccer player. And he was like, nah, you're not going to play soccer. You're going to play football. Put this ball in your hand and go run.
That's what I told Jim. That's why he started playing football. Because I was like, look, man, you ain't going to play soccer, bro. Come on out here.
If I would have played soccer, I would have went to college for it. That's your fault. That's what you just took with that. But
I'm an enabler.
Matt, so, you mentioned soccer. You mentioned the sports growing up, being an athletic guy where I just have a feeling, were you one of those guys who kind of tried everything?
I did. So I played football, a little bit of baseball in my younger years, basketball. I mean, I was never great. Don't get me wrong. But I dabbled. I did end up playing college football though. So there's a whole story and a journey behind that. I walked on at my university, and that was an experience that I'll never forget. It was a dream come true. Honestly, it's something that I wanted to do since I was a kid at that specific school as well. And so that was awesome. But yeah, I dabbled in a lot. And then I'd say in high school is kind of where I started to hone in more on football, and plus just injuries from the season just started eliminating me doing other sports. But did a little track my last year too. And that was something that I wish I would have done all 4 years of high school.
So, kind of tying that together, what you just said, thinking from a fitness standpoint, was this something that was, part of your routine, as you're coming through sports, or is this something that starts after all that?
It was part of the routine starting back in high school. So my journey with that is that my high school team, we had to lift every day. We had a gym class that was our lifting class, right? And so we were doing basic levels there, doing off-season training. But the big transition for me of really getting into it was two of my buddies that were a year ahead of me going into my senior year. They were training to walk on to a college team or get signed by a college team. And so I started training with them for my off season going into my senior year. And that's where like all of my training levels evolved. And so picked up a lot of good things from them, started doing a speed school as well, which was huge. And then went through my senior year of football there, and then transitioned to college. And then of course, once I was on the team there, it was an entirely different level of training than I had ever experienced.
Well, I'm downright jealous that you mentioned, training in school. Daniel, I'd have been more prone to not leave school in the middle of the day if we had some training.
Bro, like, how is it? Like, we went to school and we had to stay after the workout. Now folks just get a chance to throw that as a class on their schedule.
I mean, I'm telling you, I was so my daughter was a star soccer player at high school, man, and middle of the day they hold them 2-hour practice, and instead of going to class, I'm like that. I mean, man, our gym class, Daniel, I don't know specifically what your teacher did, but like we just had to like walk laps or maybe shoot the basketball. That was the extent of it. Like we didn't do anything else.
I mean, there wasn't a lot of fitness going on, like mandatory. There was a lot of like play at your own leisure. There was nothing organized.
Where'd you guys go to school?
Out in Memphis, out in the boondocks, man. We went to this. It was a big high school at the time, and
now it's the next one to be shut down list.
Yeah, it's gone downhill significantly. But
Daniel left and they didn't know how to handle it.
That's it. They got sad. They were like, man, what are we going to do? We might as well just shut the doors. I mean, we got this beautiful school, but I wasn't there. So no, but Matt, let's get into grid. When I talk to people who are involved in grid that are playing in the United Grid League or just know about it, I always ask the first question, what is grid? Because there's a variety of different answers, some being very basic as to working out, it's a sport of working out. and some get very elaborate into the science of it. So I ask you, man, as the owner, as the GM, as the coach, in your words, what is grit?
Yeah. So first things first, it's not a training methodology, right? What we do on the grid for is purely competition and, of course, with an element of entertainment. So I think that's the biggest thing. Most of the athletes that are in our sport, their background is CrossFit, a majority. Then you have another section that's background is like gymnastics, another section that might be like strongman, strong woman competitions. And so there's several different aspects that come together to make the actual sport click. And so it's in itself, it's not really a training methodology. Even our athletes, as they're training throughout their week and season, they're doing their normal workouts and then adding grid elements onto it, right? So when we break down like what grid is, I mean, shoot, it's one of the fastest paced sports that I've ever been involved in. One of the most highly dynamic in terms of the movements that we do, which is insane. And for me, one of my favorite aspects about it is the team element and having girls competing with guys on the grid. Like, it's not being done on a daily basis right now outside of grid.
There's nothing better than to watch girls just beat the shit out of guys in certain elements on the grid, and you're just like as the guy, like you look over there and you know that you're about to get destroyed by whoever. And it's not that you're bad at it, it's just that's the level of athlete that we're dealing with in grid, is people who specialize in certain areas, but then also people who are good at the gamut of things. You're talking about strength-based people, very powerful people, athletic. I mean, you've got to have a nice balance and a nice mix of it all.
I think, and the league's done a great job of that too. So a couple years back, they introduced a ringer point race, and a ringer point race is a head-to-head matchup. You can send out your best girl, your best guy, whatever, right? And they've done a great job of trying to find a way to somewhat level the playing fields, right? Like when we talk about the guys versus the girls, we usually talk about the percentages in CrossFit, right? So they've taken that aspect and made it so they can go head to head and it can be an even matchup. And so, I mean, this year alone, we've had our girls going up against several other guys and winning in those ringer points.
Because they ain't scared, Matt. They're ready. They that's what they live for. But man, like, when did you find out about grid? I mean, obviously it's been around and it's evolved obviously to what it is now, but when did you learn about grid?
So it was 2016 for me. I had a friend who was a part owner of the Miami Surge, and I was talking to him about it, and there was an opportunity for me to get involved with the Miami Surge as well. And so this is back in the NPGL days. And so I met with Mather, met with Ruby as well, and we talked, and it was something that I wanted to be a part of. So I came in as a part owner of an NPGL team. So that was in 2016, I believe. And then from there, my next step, or what my next involvement in grid, was Grid 6. And so this was an opportunity for me to compete and do exactly what I saw all these other high level athletes doing. And it's still one of the best competitions that I've ever done. So did that for a few years. At the same time, after the first competition of Grid 6, the league, the now United Grid League, started off with, back then it was the Florida Grid League, and they started off that league, right? So that was 2017. That year, I just helped out on the commissioner side of things, helped out with the commissioner at the scoring table, doing a bunch of odd end jobs there. And the next year, there was an opportunity with the former, what were we? Jeez, now I'm blanking on that. Oh, the Elite, the Palm Beach Elite. So they were looking for a general manager and another owner to come in and help out. We had a coach at that point in time, and they just needed some help on the high level. And I was like, it was perfect for me because that I could do. I knew with my schedule, I was only going to be able to give a certain amount of time. So I was like, perfect. I can help with recruiting. I can help with the high level stuff for us. That's not a problem at all. And we had a great coach at that point. So we continued that route until COVID. And then once COVID hit, unfortunately, we lost our coach. And then I had to step into that role. And so since then, I've been the owner, the GM, the coach. We transitioned from the elite to the breakers over time. And this is where we're at today.
What was your initial thoughts on the MPGL? If you go back when you were a part of it with the Surge, did you think that it was sustainable? Did you think that it was going to be something long-term, or could you see evolution of that sport and what it was being something totally different?
So I got into it in the last season. And so I didn't have all the additional history behind it. And at that point in time, it seemed to me like, we had some of the top CrossFit athletes in the sport. And it seemed like we were going to just continue to grow and grow and grow. But it was all about building the awareness of the sport. Unfortunately, financially, stuff like that, it didn't end up panning out. But everybody was devastated about that and waiting for it to come back around. They actually had a home match down at the University of Miami. And we had over 30 something people from my gym there. Everybody was hooked after that match. And so everything that I was seeing from the people that actually went, I'm like, this sport is about to skyrocket. We just need to get more eyeballs on it.
Yeah.
And it unfortunately didn't pan out that way for them. But then thankfully Mather and Ruby came in with the United Grid League.
So do you think it was one of those things where you got to walk or you got to crawl before you walk? Was it a necessary move to go regionally? And I say regionally, like it was Florida Grid League. It was all Florida teams within a relatively close proximity of each other. I think at that time, what was it? Gainesville and Palm Beach and Miami and Tampa and
yeah, the original teams, you had the Palm Beach team, you had a Miami team, you had the Tampa team, you had the Southwest Florida Sharks, and you had that 4. And I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2, but yeah, there was definitely, I think there were 6 teams when they originally started, and really, so I think the big benefit or the change in the sport was when they brought it down to the everybody can play level. Right. So that first competition, they had 3 separate divisions. And so if you think about it, or you compare it to like CrossFit, you have your RX plus, your RX, and then you have your scaled. And it was just like that. And so everybody got to get in and get a dose of this sport. And that's where you saw not only we saw athletes rise in the sport, right? So a lot of the people that were in that were competing at that first competition ended up playing in the first season of the Florida Grid League. And but then it also gave people I can actually do this. I have an opportunity to play and compete. And so that's something that the league has actually started bringing back around. So in November, we're actually going to have our Grid 6 matches at the playoffs and at the championship too. So that's going to be pretty huge. But I think that was the game level, or the game changer, is starting from that ground level and then continuing to build up all the way through. I was just listening to something about like even some of the soccer teams and what they've done and building their brand and building their awareness. Now they did it over 20 years, right? And they started at the lower levels so that as those kids were growing up, they were playing the sport and they were already fans of the sport. And now, like soccer in the States is growing big time from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Timelining this thing, putting the history of Palm Beach as well as your journey, being, so many things, owner, coach, GM. When does Palm Beach actually acquire a team? When was that?
So the first Palm Beach team came in the inaugural season. So that was back in 2017. And and so that was when we were the elite. And so they've been around since day one. The original elite team actually went undefeated in the regular season, played the Tampa team in the championship, and lost by 1 point. And so it was funny, like when I was coming back, the game plan and the strategy was that we were bringing back that whole roster. Plus, our coach was co-coach of the year. And so we were bringing back one of the coaches of the year as well. So like we were going to be stacked and set. And it ended up being that our day one roster was completely different than what we had ever planned. And unfortunately, a lot of the athletes that we thought were going to be able to come back had other commitments and they weren't able to make it. And so we had to deviate from that plan and kind of piecemeal things together with the roster that we could put together last minute. So that was a crazy introduction to year one in the sport.
I mean, that's not unique just to your sport. That's all sports. You know that. A lot of times you think, I always like football being the main one, right? The team that went to the Super Bowl, you think you're going to go back the next year. All your guys are going to come back. Everything's going to work. And then you see it very rarely do they even sniff the Super Bowl, that team that lost and believes that they're going to get back into it. So many things happen, like you say, so many moving pieces. Things just don't work out the way you see them. But, you talked about 2017 is when they acquired. You talked about getting in 2016. So how does that work? So what's the first thing that you do when you become a Palm Beach? Are you going into ownership? What are you doing?
Yeah. So the first thing that I did, my initial role was recruiting, right? And then building structure around the team as well. And so I went in and started identifying additional athletes just to fill some of the holes that we had, and started bringing those athletes into the team. And so that was what we were doing year one. And then in year two, the role compounded, right? So then I started helping out our head coach at the time as an assistant coach, and then also was doing the recruiting as well. And then still managing all of the GM roles. So when we talk about the GM roles, like a lot of that, what's going on is we have a bi-weekly meeting with the league, and then managing any communication from the league down to the players. And then there's also finances that are involved with the league, with the team as well. And so managing all the finances between the team, the league, and the players, making sure all the players are getting paid out for their sponsorships, stuff like that. And so it ended up being more than I originally planned on. But honestly, like I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean,
well, I think it helps you with success because you've seen it at every level, right? Starting with the recruiting and then coming up with coaching and then getting into GM and ownership. You've seen it from all levels, so it helps give you different perspectives and know the areas where you need to build and add success. So not all people can say they've seen it from all levels. So, with that, the GM clearly is something that evolves over time. How long does it take before that comes into play?
So all of mine was up front.
Okay.
For somebody else that's looking to, like, if somebody was looking to create their own team, right? They're usually going to come in and at a minimum, there'll be an owner and GM, right? Mm-hmm. And they may have a business partner that they bring in with them to help them out with one of the other sides. Typically it'll be like a coach. So you try to find the ideal situation is to have at least two people, right? One that can manage more of the GM role and the other one that can manage the coaching aspect of things. And the reason behind that is just because you're going to spend a ton of time doing all of those tasks, managing all of those things for the team. And so if really the question is like, how do you get started and what do you expect? It would be that if you can find somebody that can partner with you, that's always key to be that coach and you focus on the GM activities. That's always a great way to get in. If you have to do it all, you just got to make sure you have the time for it.
And that's right.
It sounds like us, Jim. Like we say one thing, but we do the other. Like Matt's talking about, you need to be able to diversify and like spread out the roles, but yet he's the owner, the GM, and the coach doing it all.
Hey, I'm willing to concede one of those roles. I would love to get somebody that's as passionate about the sport as I am and my athletes are to come in and take over at least our coaching job. But it's finding that right person. you know.
Yeah, and until that person comes and you do have these roles, you know, I'm curious because you talk about your wife and you have 2 kids that are on the younger side of things. You know, how do you balance that life? You have all these roles that you have to wear, including the ones at home, which are the most important as a husband and a father. So how are you able to balance all this? What does a day-to-day with Matt look like?
Whew. So first, my full-time job, I'm a realtor, right? And the reason, like kind of going back on my story with this, the reason why I didn't own a team year one was because it was my first year getting into real estate. And I already knew that all my time had to be dedicated to that. And so as I built up my business there and I was able to start leveraging my time a little bit better, then I could start opening up other opportunities. And so that's how I was able to kind of come in as that first position as the GM on the team. But going into it now, like I'm very well seasoned in my business. So structures, processes, procedures have been dialed in there. And I'm a very process oriented guy. So that stuff has been dialed in. So now grid is part of my schedule when we're in season. The downside to that is that means that a lot of my weekends, at least one of those days is typically tied up into us practicing for a couple hours, right? And then we have to travel for our match schedule. So my family knows, like I use my calendar religiously. So I just try to plan everything out as far in advance as I possibly can so that my family knows what I'm doing and I can be where I need to be on time. And then I'm also a very involved father too, right? Like that's one of the best things that I have in my life is my 2 little nuggets. And so I don't want to miss their sports, their activities. And so there's certain times when I've got to be able to, I might have something put on the calendar, but if my kids have something, they're extremely important. And I got to make sure that I make that as well. And so we always, me and the family, between me and my wife, like we have all the kids' activities pinned down and we're going through it every single week to say, all right, what's our cover down schedule for this week? What do you have in the mornings on this day? What do you have in the afternoons on this day? And then we figure it out that way. So when we're in season, I'd say my schedule, my morning is going to start at 6 o'clock, right? I try to get my workout in before I take my kids to school. And then right after I drop them off for school, I'm jumping into work. And my job, I mean, I can walk away from showings, you know, like be done with showings for a day. I could walk away from my computer, but my phone's always with me and my phone's always buzzing. And so my job never really stops. It just delays for a little bit, right? And then the next thing comes through. And so then in between that, I do usually a lot of my grid stuff happens like during the week outside of practice. It's late nights. And so a lot of my athletes are looking like, when do you sleep? And it's like grid season, it's usually late at night because we've got to get our strategy down, right? We've got to get our game plan together. And the best time for me to do that is after my kids are asleep, after I can finally like put down the phone from calls from work and I can just sit down and focus on grid.
I mean, that's why we start this show so late. People have asked why we do it. Daniel got to get them kids down or he's going to be no good to me.
Yeah, them kids got to be asleep because I can't be trying to juggle Bluey and podcasting and dinner and playing Barbies and all that, man. It's tough. So I totally understand exactly where you're coming from. We can relate. I mean, and I will say this from my perspective because mine are older. Definitely make sure you don't take those days for granted because now that my daughter's at LSU. She don't got no time for dad, and you know I got no games to go to anymore. It's just not the same. So, don't let those days fly by and take them for granted. Definitely make sure you don't miss a thing.
For sure, appreciate that, Matt.
Yeah, and don't let Jim fool you. He is going to LSU this weekend for LSU Alabama. So like there are some perks.
She's not playing, bro.
What'd you say, Jim?
She's not playing. There's a difference. I miss going and watching her play soccer tournaments all across the country on the weekend. Not having to pay for her football ticket to come with me. She's costing me even more money now. I don't know how that even happened, Daniel.
That's girls, man. That's what they do to you. All right, Matt. So let's jump into the 2024 season. All right. So from your standpoint, at the season as a whole, we're starting to get into the championship mode here. I think next weekend, and tell me about the season as a whole for the Breakers. Is it positive? Was it negative? Was it not what you expected? Was it exactly where you expected?
So our regular season ended in Vegas. So definitely not
with a win, I might add. With a
it
win.
Did end with a win. It did end with a win. But there was a lot that went on this season that was not expected. We went into match one, and we had some athletes that ended up bailing before the season started. And so we had to shift from that. We had another athlete that had a season-ending injury at our first team practice, and we had to shift from that. And so the positive from that is that we ended up, we have a ton of phenomenal athletes that had come back. And so they put a lot of weight on their shoulders. And then we had some rookies that I would say this is probably one of the best, if not the best rookie class that we've ever had. And these rookies had to come in and they had to play a lot, because throughout the season, you start 5 athletes, right? And you're allowed to have 3 reserves or 3 alternates. And we only had 6 total athletes, like 5 guys and 5 girls, right? For your starters. So we only had 6 guys and 6 girls throughout the whole season. So we were running low on numbers, which means that there's not a ton of subbing or anything going on there. So what happens? A lot of work on the veterans, and the rookies had to step up. So, our rookies, I kid you not, I'd say within the first half of the season turned into veterans. And that was huge. And then again, just going back to it, like some of our athletes, like Vita is one athlete that I can't praise enough. That girl does so much for the team that it's just insane how much she puts on her back, and she steps up big, right? Another really good athlete on our team is Gabby. She was another athlete that's stepping up big. Yoda, just talking about returning athletes that had to come in and dominate and take on even more with our limited roster. That was huge. So our first match, because of everything that was going on, and we played a good team. We played the Brigade, and they're solid, and they won. And then our second match was in Tampa, and we went up against the Sharks. And I think that's where we shocked a lot of people. We obviously didn't have any roster changes or removals like right before that match. Well, actually, no, that's not true. We did have one. We had one athlete that ended up leaving before match 2, I believe it was. And so outside of that, our roster was intact. We were able to practice. Everybody was able to grind together, and we came out, and that was a really good performance by the team overall. And then we went to Vegas, right? And so Vegas, we played the Wild in our first match, and Vegas was interesting. With like I told you guys, we ended up signing 2 athletes right before the match, like the morning of. And the reason behind that was that we had 2 athletes that just couldn't get out because of the hurricane. Yeah. And so that was a little bit of a game changer for our strategy and our overall game plan. So we saw some impacts from that and had to rally the team and get it back together for that last match. And the Venom was the last team that we played, and they had a lot of athletes that they lost from match 2, transitioning to Vegas, and they came out and they played extremely well. We just needed them to play a little less.
That's the Vegas Venom.
It was Daytona Venom.
Daytona. I was just saying that's a mouthful. I was trying to put it together because you said the Venom and you're talking about Vegas, and I was like, man, that's a mouthful of tea. The Vegas Venom. Okay, yeah. Now it makes more sense. Okay.
So Daytona. They went to Vegas for Mr. Olympia, and it was essentially supposed to be the United Grid League playoffs, but because of the hurricane, it kind of threw a wrench in the game plan, and it was okay. But anyway, it was a good showcase for the sport. In your eyes, was it worth the trip and worth being able to go out there, even though there was a lot of sacrifice on, like, I mean, you just look at, the amount of referees, the amount of players that couldn't make it. It wasn't a true most accurate showing of what it could have been, but in your eyes, was it a value to be able to be on that stage and go out to Vegas and compete?
It was because we got more eyeballs. Other people got to experience the sport that hadn't before. I mean, shoot, we signed a guy that's based out of Vegas. And, we've been talking with him and he loves the sport. He knew about it before that match, right? And so as I'm walking through and explaining things to him, he's like, yeah, I know this. I got it. Okay, so I'm going to do this. Cool. I transition here. Got it. And now we have an athlete that we can bring back going into the next season that probably wouldn't have ever played grid if we hadn't gone to Vegas. And so to me, if we're able to bring more eyeballs to the sport, it's always a great opportunity.
So given that it's Vegas, obviously, are there any what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas stories? I know I've been in CrossFit gyms a ton for a long time, and I know CrossFitters can get down. So when you talk about grid athletes, they're a modification, and most are CrossFit athletes too. So I can only imagine after everything, the dust was settled, like you had a chance to go out. I'm sure they got after it. So
they did. I'll tell you, I wasn't there. I had a flight after our last match to get back home. But I know that the team went out and, just the league in general went out and they went out and partied at one of the clubs. And I hear everybody had a great time. So that's all I'm allowed to say.
I mean, we're grown adults on here, Matt. We know what going out having a good time in Vegas means. Like, that's code. That's code for good times. But anyhow, I do want to ask you, because you talked about having rookies have to step up, and a lot of people may not understand, like, it's difficult for a rookie to come into grid because there's so much strategy that goes into each of the workouts, and the rotations and the movement and the subbing in and subbing out. It's almost like hockey in a sense, where you have line changes that are happening as other people are moving down the grid in real time. So, you could squat and be strong, or do, butterfly muscle ups, or be able to do 1,000 legless rope climbs. But there is a level of like learning that has to go through. There is a learning curve that rookies have to go through. I would ask this. You mentioned that, was it as a coach, as a general manager, as an owner, were there times where you're like, oh my God, like I just need these rookies to like step up just a little bit? Or were they immediately like, they're good to go? They're like, you're telling them and they're just doing.
We had some athletes that progressed and evolved into bigger roles throughout the season. But this was one of the few times where a lot of these rookies came in and were able to jump in and take starting roles off the bat. And so that was a major surprise, because when you break down like the evolution of grid, and like I said, a lot of these athletes come from a CrossFit background. The difference is that step number one is, can you do the movement, right? But being able to do the movement doesn't guarantee that you're going to win that race. So then after you confirm, okay, yes, I can do it, then it's like, okay, can you get faster, right? And then can you improve the movement? Can you perfect the movement and speed, right? Because there's that boundary line of like speed versus potentially getting a no rep. You don't want to get the no rep, but you want to be able to move as fast as you possibly can while still completing the movement in its entirety, right? And so like it's like a 3-phase process to the sport. And usually what ends up happening, or what I've seen happen, is like after that first match, you don't know it until you experience. So after that first match, the new athletes are like, oh shoot, like, okay, I get it now. I get like the dynamics of the sport. I get how fast things are moving, and I got to step my game up. So what ended up happening for us from match one with our rookies is they were already at a pretty, like a lot of our rookies were already at a pretty strong level, but then they were able to continue to improve throughout the season, which was insane, right? And so it wasn't like I never had that like shaking on the head moment. I mean, now granted, of course, like you have your normal rookie blunders here or there, but it was very minor, this season versus seasons past. And honestly, like if I had to do grade levels for a lot of these guys, they would have graded very high on every single one of their matches.
So talk to me about, looking at this rundown and I'm thinking about, you're talking about these matches. When is the playoffs for this?
Yep. So the playoffs are November 16th and 17th, and that's going to be in Fort Lauderdale.
So right around the corner. So look, if I'm going to get invested in this, man, I need to know who's the best team. I'm trying to be on the winning team. Who's winning this whole thing, man?
Wow. All right.
We don't sugarcoat nothing on here. Look, man. My dad raised me to be a Saints fan, which is atrocious. Like we aren't good very often. So I want to jump on a win.
Jim's really trying to figure out if he can turn this into some type of parlay. If there's a betting line.
You started talking about Vegas, and then we started talking playoffs. So yeah, everything you could. They're betting on the election right now, Daniel. They brought it in 69% of people voting one way or not voting, but betting one way or the other.
That's a scary thing, man. That is a scary thing.
I'm telling you, people, degenerates like myself will bet on anything, and I'm definitely getting in on this if I can find a way to bet. So who's winning it?
So, all right, before we jump into that, what I will tell you is that so the way that our season ended, right, we were tied for that wild card spot in the playoffs right now. And it came down to race time. So if we would have scored one more point, we would have been in the playoffs. And I'll tell you this, that if we were in the playoffs, I think it would have shaken things up. We know who we would have been going up against match one. We know what we would need to do. We know who we would have been going up after that. And we played them very well as well. So I think we would have been in a pretty good position. But we didn't get that 1 point, so we move on. So if I had to pick who's the favorite right now in the league, I'd say it's the Sharks. And the reason being, their strategy this past season was acquiring as much talent inside the league as possible. And if we think about that, we were just talking about all the rookies, right? And the learning and the education and everything that you have to do. So they were pulling talent from other teams and a ton of experience on all of these other with these athletes.
Daniel, it's the Yankees and the Dodgers, these Sharks.
I'm telling you, I mean,
when the heavy hitters in the lineup, I see it.
That's it. That was a huge strategy for them, and they're deep. Their roster's deep.
I mean, that's the right strategy, right? I mean, that's what you're supposed to do, building a team.
Yeah, no, it's smart. It was genius, right? And so that's been panning out for them. They're undefeated on the season. They're their number one ranked team going into the playoffs right now. I believe the number 2 team is the Wild. Again, they're pretty stacked as well, and they've got a ton of talent. But I don't
know. I might be off the Sharks because he said they haven't lost. We know in sports nobody usually runs the table. Give me the Wild. Give me the Wild.
No, not true. The Aces went undefeated last year.
Yeah.
And won the championship.
Fluke here, fluke there.
But I think so. Like, so if we just break down all the teams that are in the playoffs, right? So we talked about the Sharks. The Wild have a stacked roster, a lot of really good athletes as well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see them in the playoffs. Some of the other teams that are in there, when you talk about the Lions have the most championships in the league. And I think a lot of that comes down to like their team unity is unparalleled, right? Like their athletes train together on a consistent basis from the stuff that I had seen. And it shows on the grid, right? And so they've got a solid squad. And so they're like that. I mean, you could liken them to like the Patriots, right? You never want to count them out because they can come out and win a game that they weren't expected to win. The other teams you have in there, so the team that got in or sorry, no, the Brigade are another team. So they're playing the wild card team. So that'll be interesting to see between them and the Palm who ends up coming through. And I know the Palms they've been running with a shorter roster than they usually run pretty lean, but I think they've been running with a little bit shorter roster than they normally do. So that'll be interesting because for them, they would have the wild card match. And then if they advance from there, they've got, 2 more matches on their schedule. And so, I mean, if they're going to, the first round of the playoffs and then the championship after that. And so that could be interesting with a shorter roster, how their athletes are able to handle that and manage that throughout the weekend.
Yeah, so, I'll say this, Matt. The Palms, when I was looking back at stats and stuff, and they will run a consistent 5 out there. And then everybody else is looking at like 7 or 8 that are running out there on just depending on what event that you're doing. But yeah, I mean, sometimes narrowing it down makes it a little bit easier. You know what you got, who's got to do what. There's less moving parts, and sometimes that can be beneficial, but it really comes down to, efficiency. It comes down to being quick, transitions. I mean, every match that I've seen, even the one that you guys won in Vegas, like it came down to little things over time that allowed you to get the upper hand. And so, like, if you're no repping a rope climb or no repping, pistol stick jump over or whatever, like it's going to hit you. It's going to get you hard too.
Big time.
So my question for you, because we're trying to, get an idea of what you got going on after my wild win it all. What is the off-season plans for you, with the Breakers? What is the next step and what does that all look like?
So what we've been doing is just talking as a team and with a lot of the athletes as well. And I like to get a debrief from them about wins and losses from their perspective, right? So we're going through that now. But the next big thing for us is recruiting talent for next year and recruiting sponsors for next year. That's 2 of our biggest items to do sooner rather than later. So we've already got some strategies for some camps, not just in Florida, but we're actually going to do a camp outside of Florida this year as well, just to bring more awareness to the sport and get other athletes that are great athletes into the sport and have them join the team as well. And so we've got a packed off season. And it's funny, I was stressing out about it the other day too, just like trying to plan everything and strategize everything else we're going to do. But we're going to have a packed off season of bringing awareness, getting the team together, getting some reps in together as a squad as well, and bringing more athletes to this team.
So talking about bringing more athletes to the team, thinking about how you're talking about going outside of Florida, Daniel was talking to me, explaining to me some things, just talking about expansion. And of course, Texas is something that comes up, and he's talking to me about the former player, Sophia Davenport, acquiring the newest team, Houston. So talk to me, about expansion of this league and especially, something like that.
Yeah. So that's huge, right? Like I said, I think I want to say the league originally started with 6 teams. I believe that to be correct. I'd have to double check it. And they expanded to 8, right? And so now we're continuing that expansion forward.
When you talked earlier, it's funny you said that. Actually, now I think about it, because you referenced soccer 20 years ago. Soccer was exactly like you're talking about. It was very minimal on teams, and now they got a full on league, which is, I assume, the kind of blueprint you're going for, and that's why you said that earlier.
Yep, exactly. And so our continued expansion was already there, and we needed to make it happen. Texas was one of those areas where we wanted to tap into that space. We already have a ton of athletes that are coming from Texas to come and compete, right? And there's a lot of really good athletes out there. Sophia lives in Texas too, which is also phenomenal. And so when that opportunity presented itself, she was able to jump in and snag it, and she's gonna do great things for them, man. I'm excited for her over there. But And I think the league has already mentioned this, so I'm not spilling any of the beans on anything, but we can't have uneven teams, right? So now we've got 9 teams. So the expectation is there will be a 10th team added.
Daniel's going to buy a team in Memphis because that's where his love really is, not Florida. He can try to fake you out all day. He still loves his hometown.
The Memphis Mains.
Hey, well, speaking of Memphis, we're actually one of the areas that we're going to do our out-of-state combine isn't going to be that far away from the Tennessee area. So we'll be able to Memphis Maine athletes south.
There you go. The Memphis grind is always anything grit and grind.
We already got the shirt too, Daniel. We can already rep and promote.
There we go. Let me go get a part-time job so I can figure out how to pay for this ownership fee.
Have you guys talked to the league about potentially getting into ownership?
No. I'm gonna feel it out first. I'm gonna talk to you guys and see how you get some feedback from y'all and see how y'all feel about being owners first before I think about jumping in those waters.
But he's definitely interested in general, or else he wouldn't have brought this to me. And he's looking for something new. He's a change of course. So there's definitely opportunity, and he's all about his fitness. He's all about winning. He's a former college baseball coach, national champion. So competitive drives there, athleticism's there, knowledge of the sport. And so, yeah, he's going to learn and take it all in. And it's something I would keep your eye on when you talk about having knowledge and news of potential of happening.
Man, that's the nicest thing he's ever said about me. Man, I feel good. We could retire now. I feel like I made it. All right, Matt, before we let you go, usually we play a game called This or That, but I wanted to change things up. We're gentlemen. We're more mature than college athletes. So I wanted to try something different. I wanted to give you a hypothetical and just kind of dig a little bit deeper and just see what you thought about this. Cool. All right. So here's a hypothetical. All right. You find a book and you begin to read this book, and you discover that this is a book of your life. You get to the point of where you're at currently. Do you turn the page knowing that you won't be able to change the events and you know how your life is going to end? Or do you stop reading the book there and just let life play out?
Whew.
That's deep. I brought the deep stuff.
He threw that at me last night, and I was like, okay, and he's like, to the point of what he said to you. We ain't asking no college kids that. They're gonna be like, what did he just bring to me?
Yeah, I think, dang,
it's a good question for a husband and a father, and you got 2 young kids, and I got a part B to this that I asked Jim, and I just blew his mind last night. So once you answer this, then I'll give you the part B to it.
All right. So I'm a huge planner. So in theory, I would love to know what was going to happen. But realistically, I mean, life is amazing and the surprises that it brings you, that I don't think that's one situation that I would want to plan out. I would want to let it just come to me as it's supposed to come.
I hear you. What if you get to you're reading the book, you get to where you're at in your life, and you realize there's only 3 pages left?
That's why I don't want to know anymore.
I mean, now that's some wild stuff right there. Like that.
I'm doing everything I ever wanted to do in life. There's 3 pages left.
Yeah.
Jim said he's gonna burn the book and just burn it down.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
I still wouldn't read those 3 pages, man. I would live my life to the fullest for those last 3 days. But going into that, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of trying to live your best life every day that you possibly can. My mom, I'm in Maryland. My mom had a surgery yesterday. And one of the things that I told her for years, right, is like to live your best life. She's retired. She worked for between school and work. She did that for the majority of her life, and raising 5 kids. Like, this is her season of her life to enjoy everything she ever wanted. Right. So don't miss out on anything. And that's the way, like, if you tell me I've got 3 pages left, like, that's the way I'm living my life. And honestly, I try to do that as much as I possibly can now, of just not missing those opportunities and those experiences. So
I'll give you the question that we give the college guys, and Daniel earlier. If you would have been there, you would have had to argue with Garrett. So the question for you, Matt, is: would you rather do 10 years in a coma or 5 years in prison?
I'm not a prison dude, man. You might have to coma me up on that one.
Yeah.
See, this kid said he would take prison, and Daniel quickly explains to them prison isn't the life they want. But I like when they have a good reasoning why, and he's somebody that did not think that he would do well in prison. He just said he couldn't imagine missing out on 10 years of his life. So I wanted to ask you that question because perspective changes in just the regards that you have a wife and 2 young kids, right? Because if you throw that perspective out, 10 years is a long time to miss their life. So that always makes it interesting.
Yeah. I feel like the 5 years in prison, though, yeah, you might get to see him here or there, talk to him on the phone. And granted, it's more than you would if you were in that coma. But, I mean, that's also tough. I mean, it's a tough one either way, right? Like, I think the prison aspect, you have the mental, you've got, I mean, a bunch of other crazy stuff that happens in prison that you might not want to be a part of. And so, yeah, I don't know, dude.
Nope, not for me. I know I'm 40. I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And prison.
Oh, but you tell every guest that you're good at sleeping, and you don't even sleep that much. So that's a lie too.
But when I do sleep, I sleep very well.
You wake up and work out before I'm even close to thinking about waking up and doing anything.
I mean,
it's not about the quantity, right? It's about that quality.
That's right.
I work out just the same at 8 a.m. as he does at 5 a.m. I'm just telling you.
No, the quality of his sleep.
Yeah.
I like my sleep.
That's what allows me to be in a mental state of mind for the rest of the day to where I can sleep, because I got my 2 hours in the morning just to me. I don't have anything to worry about. No work, no kids, no nothing. Just me, my dog, my running shoes, my barbell, my weights. That's it. I'm good.
With you on that one, man.
I'm good. All right, Matt. Before you bounce, anything that you want to plug or promote?
Honestly, it's for us, it's going to be what the team's going to be doing in this off season. So anybody that's watched Grid, ever wanted to experience it in person, obviously you guys can come to the playoffs. That'll be in Fort Lauderdale. But more importantly, if you wanted to get onto a team, we will be recruiting heavily. So you guys can reach out to me. My name on every single platform is exactly how it shows up right here. So that's easy to find me there, or you can just come in and find the Palm Beach Breakers as well. And we'll talk with you guys and talk about any opportunities we have with the team.
Nice. Well, Matt. Yep.
I don't know. They might not even make the championship. Hey. I'm just saying.
Look, I'm going to teach you about something, Matt. So one thing that we didn't tell you when we were talking about all these sports is there's a real thing. It's called the in off the bench effect. And we don't know why it started happening. But for instance, let's go baseball, because we told you that was our biggest thing. All 4 seasons that we did it previous, whatever team we had the most guests on won the national championship. First MLB player we had on, he won the World Series after. First gymnast, soccer player, softball player, volleyball player, they all won afterwards. So I'm saying we got this thing going, and if I invest my time with the Wild, they're just going to win. No, actually, it should play into your favor. It should mean that your team's going to win based upon history.
Well, I was going to say, because we can bring more athletes from our team on here right now to beef up for 2025.
What's crazy is that knowledge is actually out there, and the 3 teams that have already been winning and expected to win it in baseball are the ones that are coming back, and the other ones know that. And it's like, you think that they would understand this and see if they test this whole theory. They're just going to let the teams that have been winning it do it again. And, we're good with whatever. Whoever wants to come on, we'll do that.
Hey, well, you guys can bring us on as permanent guests, man. I'm available all the time.
Let's go. There we go. Just tell them to hit me up on Instagram, and we will get every
But
breaker
Daniel, you don't want
scheduled.
him to win if you buy your Memphis team.
I mean, that's down the road. Right now, I'm worried about the present. I'm living in the present right now. All right, Matt, we wish you a successful, happy, 2024 closeout, and obviously planning for the 2025 season. Definitely want to bring you back on once you kind of get your bearings, get your idea for what 2025 is going to bring you. We'll break it down. We'll talk about it. And hopefully, if I see you out there at the grid at some point, I got a bottle of Old Dominic for you. So just keep that in mind, man.
I appreciate that, man. I'll be in Fort Lauderdale. So if you'll be there, I'll see you then.
We'll see. We'll see what I can do. That is Matt Hornaday, everybody, with the Palm Beach Breakers. If you like hearing Matt's story, or you just like hearing us average Joes talk X's and O's, please like and share the podcast on Facebook. Retweet us on X. Listen and subscribe wherever you stream your podcast. Head over to YouTube. Click subscribe. Click the notifications. That way you get notified anytime content is uploaded, because a lot is going to be uploaded tonight. Trust me on that. As always, comments, ratings, feedback, thumbs up, hearts, hugs, love. We'll take it all. And we'll see everybody tomorrow night, Jim. We got a good one, right?
Doubleheader. Got Gabby Glado, All-American from Bama, and Jordan Kane from the defending runners-up in the national championship at Cal Berkeley. So star-studded gymnastics night.
A sweet Wednesday of gymnastics. Get to talk it. It'll be fun. Let's get out of here. This has been the In Off the Bench podcast. As always, remember, strong body, sharp minds, grit and grind all the time. We are out.